All right, everyone, welcome to the next edition in the Venture Atlanta Creating Momentum for Diverse Founders series. I am Joey Womack, founder of Goody Nation, board member at Venture Atlanta, and super excited for this conversation today. We're past the holiday break, time to get things revved up. It is Q3, it's go time. You know, if you know, like I know, this is the time of the year where people make stuff happen and start to prepare for the future. So, a little bit of context here. We'll hear about how awesome our guests are in a second. But Goody Nation, for context, Goody Nation is a nonprofit based out of Atlanta that's focused on tech-focused social entrepreneurs and diverse-led startups from all over the country. And I'm really looking forward to this conversation today. Going to be awesome. We're going to talk about how we can create momentum. Essentially, how can Dallas's tech startup founders put themselves in the best position to receive investment from venture capitalists or angels, to get into top-notch accelerators, and then also to get on stage at some of the most prestigious pitch showcases from not only the city, but across the country. Before we kind of get into that, I want to kick it over to my colleague, Adil, for any thoughts and recognition of partners. Adil?
Absolutely. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. Super excited for this discussion. Really just want to give a quick shout out to all of our local partners. Obviously, we have Impact Ventures, Notley, and Agave Fund. Thank you all for joining us. This is an interactive session, so let us know where you're dialing in from, and let us know a little bit about your startup. And if you have any questions or comments, raise your hand and we will unmute you and have you join the conversation. Thanks, Joey.
Cool. So let's talk a little about Venture Atlanta. So we have three awesome guests here. I'm a natural community builder, ecosystem person, kind of convener of people. So this initiative is super exciting to me. And so, Richard, do you want to do a quick intro of not only yourself, your company, but also Venture Atlanta?
Yeah, sure. And thanks, everybody. Excited to be here. I'm a partner at Knoll Ventures. Knoll is a $26 million early stage venture capital fund based in Atlanta. My partner and I have raised $26 million to invest in pre-Series A B2B software companies, primarily in non-coastal markets. We've been investing out of the fund for roughly 3 years. We have a total of 18 existing portfolio companies. About half of those are in Atlanta, but Texas actually happens to be our second most active market, where we have 3 investments, and then we have the rest of the portfolio kind of scattered throughout the rest of the country. In addition, I'm also a board member at Venture Atlanta, and I'm also the board member who oversees the company recruitment efforts on behalf of the conference. And for those of you unfamiliar with Venture Atlanta is the largest venture capital conference in the Southeast. We typically have north of 1,000 attendees at the event, which primarily consists of investors, founders, service providers, and other ecosystem participants from all over the country that fly to Atlanta for a 2-day conference. This year, the conference will be held on October 20th and 21st in downtown Atlanta. So we're really getting excited to have everybody back in person. And typically at the conference, we have roughly, about 45 companies that present on stage. The companies that participate range from everything from pre-seed to seed stage companies that are just getting a product off the ground, to companies that are out raising Series A, Series B, Series C rounds. And historically, we've had a ton of success. Our alumni companies have raised north of $5 billion in external funding after participating at the conference. And our 2020 cohort has already raised north of $250 million in less than 9 months since participating in the conference. So we believe the numbers really speak for themselves. So we're excited to really kick things off. The conference has grown to become more a regional event where the participants span from everywhere from DC down to Texas. And so we're actively recruiting companies from the Texas market, and really look forward to connecting with founders in Houston, Dallas, and Austin, and really spending time there. So thank you very much.
Sorry about that. Awesome. So before we kind of jump into the conversation, let's hear from our guests. from Texas. And so I can't talk about how awesome they are. I'm not that good of a host and a moderator. So I'm going to kick it over to Benjamin for his intro, and then we'll go over to Ethan, and then we'll start the conversation. So Benjamin.
Definitely. Thanks, Joey, and Goody Nation team and everyone involved in putting this event on. Extremely proud and honored to be included in this event, and excited to hopefully help this move the needle, here in Dallas and beyond, and helping underrepresented founders. So I'm the founder and CEO of Impact Ventures. We are a nonprofit startup accelerator with the mission to close the racial wealth divide, specifically focused on women and communities of color. And I'm also the director and managing partner of Inclusive Capital, which is Texas' first integrated capital fund that provides both flexible debt and patient equity to women and entrepreneurs of color. We look at both high growth SaaS, mobile, B2B, B2C type startups, and we also look at scalable traditional business models as well that might be looking for debt capital. We launched in 2017 as a program or as an organization, but launched our first accelerator, unfortunately, in a pandemic in 2020. However, since then, we've seen the resilience of our founders, and they've raised about $1.7 million since our first cohort. We're on cohort 3 now, created 49 jobs in the local ecosystem. And I believe we have about 40, after this cohort, it'll be 68 in our alumni. And so we'll look to actively make investments through our accelerator and outside of our accelerator. And we focus on North Texas and the greater Texas kind of region, hopefully to scale to more of the Southeast. So a little bit about me, excited to be here.
Awesome. Gonna kick it over to Ethan.
Hey folks, my name's Ethan, and though I'm based in Austin currently, I'm originally from Dallas, born and raised there. And currently I work as a principal for Notley Ventures. We are a hybrid for-profit nonprofit group. We use our for-profit investments to power our nonprofit initiatives. And I manage our portfolio, and in particular, my specialty is venture capital. I also run a syndicate fund called the Agave Fund that invests specifically in startups led by Black, Hispanic, or Native American founders. And we're hoping to raise our first venture fund next year based off of our portfolio since we launched last year. And then a little bit more about my background. I studied finance as an undergrad at the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania, worked in management consulting at BCG, Capital One. And then several years ago, I moved to San Francisco to work as a data scientist for, at the time, was a startup called The Firm. It is now a public company. And the best thing that could have happened to me was I met my wife there. She was the 13th employee for a firm, and she still works there. So she's seen it all from when she was the 13th employee to now it being a public company. And so my background specifically is in fintech. Notley Ventures has a really strong background in CPG, so I've been gaining a lot of expertise in that arena. And then I'm super proud to be from Dallas, and I'm excited to talk about some of the great things I'm seeing and some of the portfolio companies we've invested in that have come from Dallas.
Nice. So let's talk about it. Let's talk about Dallas before we kind of dig into how diverse startup founders can put their best foot forward. Let's zoom out for a second and talk about the Dallas startup ecosystem as a whole. So I'm going to kick it to Benjamin first for your views on it.
Yeah, I think Dallas startup community is definitely one that's more unique than others. We have a ton of, I would say, the right ingredients and mix, right, for a thriving startup community. I think there's, like most ecosystems, there's some challenges. I think uniquely, if you even if you just say the word Dallas, you have to ask another deeper question of like where in Dallas, right? Because you could be from McKinney and you'll still say Dallas, and some folks could be from anywhere in the mid cities and just say Dallas because it's most common to most people. So geographically speaking, like Dallas, just understand that when you say Dallas, you mean like the whole metro. You could mean the very well the whole metroplex. But what's interesting about the ecosystem and the geographical layout is that the pockets that are surrounding in the metroplex, literally they have everything they need within their own, city. So what I mean by that is that if you live in Plano or live in Frisco, there's no reason for you to have to travel to downtown because you have a mall, you have a grocery store, you have a startup community, you probably have a 1 million cups that, in your city. So a lot of the resources are really kind of tailored to whatever part of the city that you live in. And so unlike other ecosystems like, Silicon Valley, where place is really a centered kind of value in the makeup of the ecosystem, Dallas is very different because it's more of a web, right? It's more of this web that has like, okay, how is Fort Worth connected to Frisco, Dallas? You got Irving and a small little pocket of business, a business park in Irving where companies get their birth, like Alchemy, that's now a publicly traded company that's based out of Plano now. So you have to first wrap your mind around the geographical layout that it's more spread out. So you could come here and be like, well, where are the startups? Where do people gather? Well, it depends on where you live, right? If you're living in Frisco, you probably go to the Star. If you're downtown, you probably go to Capital Factory. So it really just depends on where you live within the ecosystem. That's all encompassing Dallas. But as a whole, I'd say the Dallas startup community is fairly young. We had our first Dallas Startup Week, I want to say back in 2014. 2013, 2014, that's pretty young, for a startup community, which means that there's a lot of growing, there's a lot of opportunity for, companies that move here, just because Texas is a very business friendly climate in terms of taxes. It's very affordable. So companies can get a lot more runway. A lot more bang for their buck, for their dollars, if they move, to this area. We have a huge business, and when I say business, I mean corporate climate, where if you're a B2B company, there's a lot of headquarters companies. I mean, Mary Kay, American Airlines. I mean, a lot of the companies you can think of that are fairly antiquated when you talk about innovation in industries that haven't been disrupted for a while. So they're just ripe for opportunities here. I'd say one of our biggest gaps, though, is the talent pipeline, which a lot of our institutions are really doubling down on, like our regional chamber. A lot of our workforce commissions are really trying to push the narrative around talent, just because we don't have the Georgia Techs or the talent pipeline that's constantly feeding into the marketplace. If you're familiar with UTD, University of Texas at Dallas, that is probably one of the strongest, I would say, tech beds right now that's producing talent that's coming out. I mean, they have their own venture fund that they're running, student-led venture fund. I mean, they're doing a lot of innovative things, and companies that are coming out of that and getting funded. But then I think there's opportunities with the HBCU circuit with Paul Quinn, and finding unique talent that's really looking at problems in a very unique way in terms of maybe more socially driven or social enterprise initiatives, where their mission really is more how do we alleviate poverty and get folks through the value chain to be able to economic mobility and sustainability. But overall, I'm also a part of Venture Dallas, which is similar to Venture Atlanta, where we're trying to spur more interaction between investors and startups. Knowing Dallas has a big oil, gas, and real estate, market presence, there's money and capital here. However, it hasn't been flowing into the hands of deserving startups. And so what you see is a lot of our startups going elsewhere and going to different places to get capital. I know we'll dive into some of the success stories that are happening. Ethan, I think you guys have share in your portfolio, Canaries and some of those companies that are doing great. However, they had to go. I mean, a lot of my friends that are getting capital, they had to go elsewhere. Techstars in DC, Craig Lewis got his start at Techstars, right? Now Western Union, Techstars invested in his Series A round, right? So, they're getting a lot of support from outside of Texas. And I think now we're trying to figure out, well, how do we revert that attention back to the resources that are here, and how do we unlock the capital that's here? Because there's 22 billionaires, in the Metroplex. I mean, there's capital here, but how do we get that? How do we unlock that capital is the question we're asking ourselves right now.
For sure. No, that's awesome. That's awesome. So I want to kick it over to Ethan. I mean, said you're born and raised there. What is your perspective of the Dallas startup ecosystem?
I think it's not too dissimilar, believe it or not, from the rest of Texas, particularly Austin. I think Austin gets a lot of hype, but if you actually look at the data, there are actually literally more tech jobs in Dallas than there are in Austin, right? Dallas is also absorbing a ton of Californians. Austin seems to be absorbing, maybe 80-20 northern, southern Californians, and it's, the flip side of that for Dallas, right? But a lot of the stuff that's going on in Austin is going on in Dallas. People just, they don't know numbers. They don't look at data. And so, I always say data is greater than any narrative. So in terms of, I think Benjamin brings up a great point that the dollars aren't being funneled into startups. There are a lot of older, antiquated companies in Dallas, but the same thing can be said of Austin. Prior to the pandemic, the best thing you could say about Austin was Dell, right? Nobody's talking about Austin. I worked in San Francisco. I worked for a PayPal Mafia company. I'm close to some of those founders. I'm close to Max Levchin. My wife actually, knows Elon Musk. We don't have those types of folks in Austin. Now we have Elon, but really he's hanging out in South Texas. He ain't even hanging out in Austin. Again, there's this hype, there's this narrative that isn't justified by the actual data of what we're seeing. So, we can sit here and talk about what Dallas doesn't have, which is true. But I think, if you're going to be an entrepreneur, if you're going to be an investor, you really have to think about what could be, what's going to happen, right? You go where the puck's headed, not where the puck's been. And I think Dallas literally has more capital than Austin. And Austin goes through the same thing too. We have a lot of capital, but very little of that's going to startups. So that's a problem you're going to find in Texas with its history in oil and gas. That's just the way it is, right? But we can change that, one. Two, Dallas is much bigger than Austin, right? So we have more, talent. And three, there's a really good book called the New Geography of Jobs that was written in 2013 that talks about, why do certain cities become well known for industries like Silicon Valley, for example, San Francisco, San Jose being known for tech. A lot of it's just randomness. It's really cities build around great talent. It's not the other way around. It's not like, this city made a person. It's usually the opposite. If you look at the history of the Bay Area, if Hewlett and Packard weren't born there, if Steve Jobs wasn't adopted there, we probably aren't talking about Silicon Valley. There are great universities in Boston. There's a strong history of defense spending in Boston, in New York, and we're not talking about them the way we're talking about the Bay Area, right? And so I think if we recognize that that's really the empirical truth, that a lot of this is kind of random, then if you're an entrepreneur, in today's age, more than anything, I think you can decide to be anywhere you want to be, right? You can be in Fiji and launch a great startup because you can hire folks remotely, you can get capital remotely, you can Zoom. And so I think if you're looking at other factors, I think a place like Dallas that has a ton of people, that's affordable, that is one of the most diverse cities, not just in the US, but on the planet, there's a lot of positive tailwinds for why an entrepreneur would want to go to Dallas. And, again, my background's data science. I've looked at the numbers. I don't see anything special about, Austin compared to Dallas, or frankly, even Miami, right? I don't think there's going to be another Bay Area. And rather than try to reproduce that, rather than try to capture that lightning in a bottle, we should really be focused on creating our own opportunities and creating an ecosystem that is completely different and frankly improves upon the way things were done before. So I'm very excited. Some of the best folks of color, frankly, as founders, I'm seeing in Dallas, whether it's Canaries, it's Cormit, it is ShearShare, it's Gig Wage, right? You're not seeing those folks in Austin because there are no folks of color in Austin. Look at the data. There aren't a lot of us, right? So that's something that Dallas has and Atlanta has that Austin will likely, at this point, with the trend that it's on, will not have. And so if you're somebody in Dallas, or you're somebody in Houston or in Atlanta or Miami, I think you can really hang your hat on that and say that is the differentiator between us and everybody else, is that we're building the future, right? Because the future is diverse. The future looks more like the folks on here than it does, the folks in the Bay Area, right? And so I think that's something that Dallas has that, frankly, Austin does not have, but Houston has as well. I think Houston has a fantastic opportunity to build on the fact that it has so many diverse founders already. And so as an investor, I think this is the future. This is where we should be looking.
Nice. So before we dig into it for diverse founders, Richard, I want to get your view of things. I mean, you're based in Atlanta. Mm-hmm. You've done a lot of deals in Texas in general, especially relatively recently. What is your view on the Dallas startup ecosystem?
Yeah, I mean, I think both Ethan and Ben hit on a lot of the key points there, where it's a super kind of business friendly place to start and to run a company. There's a relatively low cost of living, which means founders can build companies in a relatively capital efficient manner, unlike somewhere like maybe the Northeast or the Bay Area, where dollar really goes a lot further. I would say in the state of Texas in general, you tend to have a relatively, well-educated workforce, which is really important for innovation and for people to, kind of young, particularly younger folks, to come out of the university systems to go and work for kind of emerging and startup companies. And then also, it's one of the most diverse states in the country, which I think a lot of people don't really appreciate. So you have the ability to build a really well-rounded and high potential company through that workforce. And then lastly, this is something I've really noticed in founders in the state, but and I think this is somewhat similar to founders that you find in Atlanta too, where there's not this overabundance of capital available to them. And so they tend to have sort of a chip on their shoulder, and they tend to find a way to grind and to really hustle and to really value every dollar that's invested in the business in a way that maybe you wouldn't see with a founder or a company on the West Coast. So I think there's this kind of inherent grind that you find in founders there, where it's more of like almost like an earned mentality, which I think is very interesting from an investment perspective.
Nice. I love the grind. Maybe we should retitle this episode "The Grind." I love it. But let's talk about before we talk about how founders can best position themselves for success. I'd like to understand. I'm sure the people watching as well want to understand, what is it like for a diverse startup founder in Dallas? And Benjamin, I'll kick it to you.
Definitely. I mean, it's piggyback off of what Richard was saying. The diverse founders that I'm seeing that are getting to growth, they're really being uniquely positioned to where they can be choosy about who their investors are. And I say that because there's not much competition for underrepresented founders. I mean, the folks that we just named on this call, like the 7, that's probably like the top underrepresented founder companies that are coming out of Dallas right now, right? So when there's not much competition, like, you can be a little bit more choosy about, and intentional. I say more intentional than choosy, but about who you let on your cap table. And I think that's a very powerful position that underrepresented founders typically don't have in a space where, less than 2% venture capital goes to them, right? They typically lean towards the idea, I'm going to take whatever comes to me, right? And I think coming out of Texas and out of Dallas, they have a unique opportunity to kind of have more negotiating power, I think, and getting access to capital, because the space is so big, but there's few fishes, right? And so you can really be intentional about that. Now, I'll say, when we first started, and this is just 5 years ago, right? In speaking to the Mandy Prices, the Craig Lewises, they had wished that a program like ours was around when they first started, because when they first started, there was no resource for them to go to in terms of accelerators, incubators, specifically for high growth companies. I think we do well in supporting small businesses with our chambers of commerces, our SBA programs, our SBDCs. Like, those are great. But for underrepresented founders that are in this space, playing the high growth, venture-backed game, when we started, as I mentioned, we started in 2017, and the community didn't know terms like cap table or the product development process, right? Because if you think about, a lot of these skills are almost prerequisite to certain industries that we typically have low participation rates in, right? A lot of STEM focused career paths, not a lot of us are in. I think the stat was like less than 12% of inner city schools have quality STEM programs. So when you think about that pipeline and how it starts at an early age, if folks aren't in the tech industry, like, where and how are they going to learn the product development process? Like, so we introduced them to things like design thinking, right? We introduced them things like hackathons that were kind of low fidelity, no cost, no intimidation ways for them to get in and build prototypes and build products, because they didn't have the proximity or the exposure to those types of things. If you didn't pursue high finance in school and become an investment banker or work in management consulting or work with a VC fund, like, what reason would you have to learn how venture funds work, right? Unless you've been through the startup process before, right? And so for us, it was a very unique opportunity where I was building for what I saw coming, and had to stay true to what I knew was going to happen over time with this whole migration of companies coming out of California and into the Southeast, right? So I would say the experience now is much more. I won't even call it robust, but I'll say there's much more out there in the market now than it was, 5 years ago when we were singing this tune and raising this flag when no one else was. So I would say that the experience is very unique. You still have to be scrappy, which we expect all founders, to be scrappy, but even more so here we're in an area where I think one of the value propositions, right, of programs like ours is that we kind of built outside in, meaning that I took my relationships that I built across the country and built those relationships and then built an accelerator versus inside out. So I think the value of that is that when startups go through our program, they instantly get an access to a national network, right? Versus us building it internally to where they have access to, whatever is going on in the Dallas area. We can introduce them to folks in Atlanta and Boston and Baltimore and DC and Miami, et cetera. And when you're running a high growth company, like you're going to launch in different markets. So you have to have those inroads and connections to be able to grow, right, that fast. And so I think the experience now has changed to where we're seeing the next wave and the next batches of the Canaries, the gig wages, the core meds, the folks, simply because the conversations are happening more, right? Joey, you talked about confidence. The fact that you can talk to another entrepreneur that understands exactly where you're coming from. Hey, I met with this investor, man. He was asking me if I wanted, was my note going to be pre-money or post-money? Back then, there wasn't conversations you can go and have with someone who looked like you, who also knew the experience you were going through. So I would say now there's much more robust conversation. There's more tech-focused mentors. I think one of the challenges with having, Ethan, you mentioned about tech jobs, right? Corporate tech folks are different than startup tech folks, right? And I think sometimes people like mesh the two. Like just because you're a great product developer with a company doesn't mean you can run a startup, right? The languages are different. The goals and outcomes are different. The risk is different. Building within a company and building, in a startup. And so I think now there's becoming this flywheel. And one of our visions for our organization is that in 10 years, we should work ourselves out of business. Like we should not be in existence in 10 years, because if we incubate 500 to 600 entrepreneurs over the next 10 years, those entrepreneurs should go on to exit companies, to become angel investors, then to come back and pour into the ecosystem to where I'm not the sole person that everyone comes to when they get presented a deal. Right. Like there's other people in the ecosystem now that have been through the process, can effectively answer those questions and be a resource. So I'd say building that social capital and that network is definitely a key part of what that experience might look like for underrepresented founders here.
No, I love it. I know Manny from Canaries, I know Derek from CoreMed, and Courtney and Dr. Ty from ShearShare. Met Craig before. To be clear, like they're some of the most impressive founders, generally speaking. Don't care what you look like or where you're from, that I've seen in general. And I think I hold them up to, I put them in the top tier of all diverse founders, really in the country. Like I've been super impressed with the Dallas startup scene. And hopefully, again, I think you pointed out correctly, like I think the same thing we say here in Atlanta. There is a whole generation of founders that came, but I think really the telltale sign is going to be, how do we develop this next generation of folks that really started in the last 18 or so months. But Ethan, I don't know if you had anything that you wanted to share on, diverse founders in Dallas.
Well, you named a bunch of great founders that, if I blindfolded you and I just told you what they did, it doesn't matter what they look like, who they are, they're just fantastic founders. And I think that's something that is special about Dallas that, again, we haven't found in Austin, right? And that's not a surprise. If you just look at the demographics, Dallas is super diverse, Austin is not. And I think that's a real point of differentiation, that if you're an investor or if you're a founder and you're thinking about the place you want to build, Dallas is great for that. And I will say this, even though the startup community is still growing, it's still fairly nascent in Dallas. This stuff isn't rocket science. It's really not, right? You just have to experiment. You just have to be willing to try things, to get dirty, to fail. And, you don't take it personally as an investor. You don't take it personally as a founder. You go right, back to back. And I think if we adopt that mindset in Dallas, very quickly you're going to start to see, that kind of leapfrog effect occurring, where you can quickly learn from some of the other places like the Bay Area or New York or Seattle, where they have a strong startup ecosystem. We can already start adopting some of that in Dallas. So I think we talk about these things like they're rocket science. They're not. It's pretty straightforward stuff. You just need to have a group of people discussing it, working on it, and building that critical mass that hasn't been there previously in Dallas. And actually, a point I wanted to make earlier about Dallas, Benjamin had brought up that it is a really big geography, all these different parts of Dallas, right? Just because you're in Dallas doesn't necessarily mean you're in the same place, right? That's actually the Bay Area. People don't realize that. If you work in the East Bay, so my wife was born in Oakland. She took pride in never spending any time in San Francisco until she was like 25 or something, right? Folks in the East Bay could not care less about San Francisco. And most folks in San Francisco aren't even from San Francisco, right? They're like folks seeking jobs. And then nobody even talks about the South Bay, no offense to the South Bay. And the North Bay is where you become rich and Republican, and that's where you go to retire and die, right? I'm being real with y'all. That's the Bay Area. I got plenty of family there. My wife and I, we're actually going to be spending a month there in the summer to take up our newborn and show them around the family. So I say this in that there's this belief that the Bay Area is this monolithic ecosystem. It's not. And I actually think that created a lot of good competition, a lot of good diverse thinking, even though the Bay Area is not the most diverse place. That's something that Dallas also has, where it is good that you have these different groups that can work together and approach things and tackle things differently. And so, in some ways the size is unwieldy, but in other ways it gives you all these different pockets, all these different ways you can innovate and then share those learnings across, right? And that's the ingredient that I think is missing in Dallas, is the willingness to share and to collaborate, right? Everybody's kind of pulled up, whether it's in Frisco, whether, you could be in Seagoville, right? You could actually be in Dallas. They really have to start sharing the learning, sharing their network, sharing employees, sharing investors. Once you start doing that, it compounds, and then you achieve escape velocity.
So that's awesome. And Ethan, I think I'm going to kick it back to you. Let's talk a little bit more about like specific examples of great founders, and maybe we use some of the ones that you all mentioned before, the canaries or startups, canaries, shares in the gig wages of the world. So let's talk about through the context of perhaps investors or something like that, or we can just kind of keep it in general. What are some of the things specifically that you like about those startups, right? And so again, the goal here is for us to identify some key things that's awesome about some of those top diverse founders in Dallas, or top founders in Dallas in general, and figure out ways to share this information to other founders as well. So Ethan, I'll start with you, then Benjamin, I'm gonna kick it over to you.
Well, Richard made a great point that these founders tend to be more capital efficient. And so I want to see that you're really making do with what you have, that you're quickly bootstrapping, that you are constantly iterating, right? We're not seeking perfection. We don't expect it. What we're seeking is progress. And so those founders that you've mentioned, they're really good about keeping you updated. They're really good about experimenting. They're really good about stretching every dollar that they have, stretching their network, getting introduced to friends of friends of friends, right? Collaborating. They all know each other. Those are the different things that I think these founders have that other places, frankly, don't have. Also, too, a lot of those founders you just mentioned, it's interesting, they're older. And I want to call that out because, everybody thinks it's a young person's game, like it's like the NBA or something, like, the best talents, the folks on the rookie contracts. That's not true, right? You've got your LeBrons as well, where, they're 36 years old and still balling, right? And that is in many ways the founders I'm seeing in Dallas. A lot of them are seasoned. Like, you take the Caldwells, for example. They lived and breathed, being barbers and stylists. They had literally educated other barbers and stylists. And they said, I see a market problem and I can solve that. And they took all their knowledge and acted on it, right? And they're some of the scrappiest founders I know, and I'm so proud to back them, right? I think that's something that I'd like to, folks who don't think they're founders may in fact be founders, that you have this body of experience, this body of knowledge that probably gives you insights into problems, which is what it's all about. That's what being a great founder is about, is you're trying to solve a problem that you think you can solve better than anybody else, right? And so I think we have a lot of great raw material in folks who have experienced a bunch of things, have lived a bunch of experience, lived a long life, and have a set of problems that they think they're uniquely qualified to solve. And I would start there if you're looking for great founders.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. Before we kick it to Benjamin, I'll give share two quick stories. So one is Julberg Solomon, another one is a shall be named nameless founder in retail tech. To your point about the Caldwells and talking in being okay with sharing their domain expertise and also relaying it to the world, right? So how it relates to their startup. So Barry Gibbons, on an earlier version of this when in Atlanta a few weeks ago, he talked about the first time he saw Julberg Solomon pitch Part Pick when she got her starter at Part Pick. I think it was for like Rise the Rest or something to that effect. And so Jewel went on stage first. She talked about, and so Part Pick is dealing with replacement parts. She tied in the story of her grandfather who was looking for replacement parts. At the time she had the idea, she was working for a company that specialized in helping people find replacement parts. And that's how she got the idea, and the rest is history, right? So it was a personal piece. It was the experience working in the space that helped to set her up for success, that she knows what she was talking about. And she went on to have success there with that company, obviously. I've talked to hundreds of founders or thousands, quite honestly. Recently, I was talking to one that was in retail tech. Now, this founder had been working in retail since they were like 15, 16 years old, right? You think like Gap and Banana Republic and so on and so forth. But at no point during their presentation and in their deck that they mentioned they had 10 plus years of working in retail, even though it had obviously inform their decision to focus on that particular space. And so in particular, I saw with this, the questions they were getting back was, well, how do you know what you're talking about? It wasn't until then that the founder actually realized they should have talked about this experience the entire time. My point of bringing that up is that I see for many diverse, and this founder was diverse, many diverse founders, they tend to leave off real world experience because they don't think it applies. They don't think it's cool enough. I didn't work for Google or something like that, even though you have 10 plus years of working in the industry. So these are, in my opinion, and I've seen this often enough to know that it's an issue that has to be addressed, in that diverse founders have to be intentional about looking backwards and being okay with, hey, look, I'm awesome. I have a lot of experience, and it's made me an expert in this particular area, and I'm well positioned to solve this problem. So again, the Caldwells for me are a perfect example, and you kind of helped to highlight it, that they're in the space. They are, they're super educated. They've been in space for a minute. They've done probably everything in the space. And whenever you combine that with their energy, it's like it's a no-brainer you're going to invest. I don't care what. When the first time I taught a court, now it's like, I don't care what you do. Like, I'm good. Here, take my money. Take it. Like, matter of fact, don't even give me a return on it. Like, just here's some money. Do what I just want to see you win, because I believe you're going to be successful. Anyway, so Benjamin, are there any other examples you've seen from awesome diverse founders in Dallas that do a great job putting their best foot forward?
I have too many examples. Right now we're on track to have about 100 companies in our portfolio, and I think there's something of tremendous value to say towards that as building a platform, right, for a young startup community, is that many of the next great companies in this next wave that we were talking about are going to be like a percentage of this 100, right, of these companies, right? And so I think the idea and one of the challenges and opportunities when you talked about, leaving off their experience, I want to speak to the leadership qualities of underrepresented founders. And I say leadership quality because when you're in an ecosystem like Texas, where not a lot of capital is flowing, and you're forced to be resourceful and scrappy and kind of build with 3 times as fast with 3 times as less resources, the ability to inspire team members I've seen has been fascinating. When a lot of time in early stage companies, when you don't have salaries to pay people, usually you're paying them through equity, some type of ESOP or ownership perspective in the company. And what I've seen with our founders is they've really shown the ability to inspire. And I think that's a huge, often left out quality of a great founder, is the ability to turn other people into advocates, right? Like, no one's going to care as much as about your startup than you. But the fact that they can build like an army of other people who care about that same problem, um, and and even though not have a six-figure salary, right, to pay them, I think it's a tribute to a ton of leadership qualities. And at the same time, they still struggle with imposter syndrome and, you know, other factors on, you know, confidence. Should I be here? It's like, you just inspired 10 people to come work for you, and you're scared to go talk to this one investor because they might ask you, you know, questions that you might not have heard before. And I think that's a powerful thing to note, is just the leadership qualities of them. And I'll speak to a couple of examples. There was a company. You talked about age, Ethan. Our last cohort, one of our top performers was a 55-plus-year-old man, a Black male that was in our program. He was the first Tibbetts, I forget the award, but it's the SBIR awards that they give every year to SBIR companies. He's the first Black SBIR winner, company called Forward Edge AI. They're doing a ton of things in the AI space around pathogenic and germ identifications through COVID, that they're doing for the government. And then they also do a ton of stuff around robocalling right now. That was an extreme spike, you know, with the whole COVID. Everyone's at home, everyone's phishing, cybersecurity, some stuff they're doing around ML, machine learning, AI. Another company that we often sometimes don't think about in terms of like the venture world is consumer products and food products, right? Company called The Good Jerky literally just made seafood jerky. Think about your traditional beef jerky. They got like 5 or 6 flavors of seafood jerky. We wouldn't classify that as like stereotypical innovation, but when you think about offering a product that serves as a healthy food option for communities where typically, you know, we either in food deserts or food swamps, with you know, health, not even having access to different foods, but unhealthy options. Their company is providing kind of a snack alternative for families called The Good Jerky Seafood. He saw it out of a notion when a family member got, you know, sick and dealt with, you know, high blood pressure and diabetes and things like that. And so he literally created it out of a need of a very personal problem that he had proximity to. Another company called Church Space, the Airbnb for churches, right? Like, churches are the number one, like, sometimes can be the largest employer in some communities that literally have shut down for the past year due to coronavirus and stay-at-home orders. And so they provide an opportunity for churches to create revenue streams by renting out their space to people who need commercial space. They've got a ton of traction in such a short amount of time, and you would think that it's such a no-brainer. Like, what, someone else has to be doing this already. But the way they've been able to capture the market, specifically when you talk about that cultural competency, which is why having Black and brown investors is just as important as having Black and brown founders, is because, you know, the typical white heterosexual, you know, male that's used to investing in clean energy and high tech, you know, companies might not see value in the fact that these churches are not able to survive and have the opportunity to build revenue streams within their. They might not see that as a viable investment opportunity. But someone like me, who's a PK kid, a preacher's kid, growing up, I know exactly what he's talking about. You know, I remember starting a church, you know, in our living room. I remember starting renting out a larger, more established church to grow our church, you know, as a kid. So I could resonate with all those different, you know, pain points that they were talking about. And then you replicate that and say, okay, well, how many of these same churches are across the U.S.? So the market size is tremendous when you talk about that. Just like a shear shirt, it's like a no-brainer, right? When you think about it. Algo Pair is another company that we invested in last year that's doing automation for trading, doing algorithms for trading, and their mission is to democratize access to creating wealth. So they're letting the everyday individual that doesn't, you know, happen to know a lot about investing and stock investing use high performance algorithms that were developed by, quant developers and quant traders get access to some of the same, the same techniques that folks who pay millions of dollars to Morgan Stanley and Fidelity and all these companies to invest their portfolio. These are just some examples. A company called ClassHook that's coming out just landed a major opportunity with a school district here, is cross-sectoring the intersection between education and pop culture and student learning, and thinking about how the next generation, Gen Z, they don't learn with traditional methodologies, right? They need more interaction. They need more cultural relevancy. They found a way to use artificial intelligence and machine learning to identify learning opportunities in your everyday, pop culture movies. You think about Shrek, you think about, what's a sitcom TV show like Seinfeld, Friends, right? All these different moments and scenes, right, that you can actually create teachable lesson plans off of that gives teachers more culturally relevant content to keep their students engaged. These are just a few examples. I could go on some of our portfolio companies, but these are the companies I feel like are going to be the next companies that you guys are going to hear about coming out of Dallas.
Nice. I love it. I love it. So we only have a few more minutes left, but I did want to talk about one thing, and that's the written part of when companies get evaluated for accelerators or pitch showcases or something like that. And I think it really hit home to me, Benjamin, where you were talking about the church space, right? I'm sure when you saw the application come through, you're like, okay, I get it. Yes, I get it, right? So the reason why I'm bringing this up is because we want to make sure diverse founders are well positioned to capture people's attention from a written application, whether it's, like we're talking about online here, but it's still written, right? And so the experience and going to the user persona, and I've evaluated, I don't know, probably at this point, 10,000 things between South by Southwest panel picker for a few years, and my own, accelerator program and pitch showcases, Venture Atlanta, 3 years of being on the recruiting selection committee. I mean, the mindset of an evaluator is that you're super busy. That's why you got selected in the first place. You probably say, okay, here's about 2 weeks until the deadline. Something came up. Now I got a week to go until I got to evaluate 200-300 applications, maybe even more. And it's like, I said this before, it's almost like Tinder. Not that I really know about Tinder, but I've heard stories about how it works, right? So, you're swiping one way and it's like, okay, I got 1 week to evaluate all these people. I really should spend 15 minutes per application, but I don't have the bandwidth. So I'm going to look at the first few sentences. If it's interesting, I'm going to hit yes. If it's not, I'm going to hit no. And then you start going, no. This is kind of interesting. So I'm going to come back to it a little bit later on. No. Yes. No. Oh crap, I got 1 day to finish like 100 applications. And it's like, no, across everything. And then you got like 10 left. You're like, okay, I feel good about this. Like, that's literally how it goes for many people doing evaluations. So Richard, I'm gonna kick it to you right quick.
Yep.
Is there any thoughts on how, or what really captures your attention when you have to evaluate a bunch of applications in a short amount of time? What jumps off the page for you?
Yeah, I think you bring up a good point that people who are reviewing applications are peeling through hundreds at a time, and it's a lot of content to swallow and digest. So I think in this instance, sometimes finding ways to be shorter is almost more valuable, to be more concise with what you put on the application. So I would recommend a certain degree of brevity and kind of how you respond to the certain fields to make it very easy and kind of cut straight to the point. So the person reviewing the application can get through the content relatively efficiently. I would also say to really, and this touches on something that we discussed earlier, is to really not undersell your domain expertise in a space. We really like it sort of cuts toward the question of why this founder and why now, being two critical parts of kind of how a lot of investors think about companies and backing founders. And so really hammering home on the amount of domain expertise you have in the space, I think really makes sense to show that you have an intimate understanding of the problem that you're solving and how to solve it and why this is a really big and valuable problem to solve. And then lastly, the last point I'll touch on is probably shows some real thoughtfulness about how you describe the overall addressable market. I think in many cases, founders, will, talking about a market, they'll just Google or find some, McKinsey report or some other report that says the market for X is, $20 billion, and they'll pull that number. But really kind of honing in and doing more of a bottoms up analysis, I think carries a lot more weight and reflects a lot more thoughtfulness as a founder, to where maybe you're taking the approach of, there are, 5,000 customers that fit sort of the criteria that that I think would be good users of this product. And if each of these customers pays, $100,000 a year, $50,000 a year, or some number, then that kind of backs into an overall addressable market that is sufficiently large enough to get an investor interested. So I think being kind of thoughtful about how you estimate market size, I think always sort of stands out to me when I'm reviewing applications, because it shows a kind of a deeper level of thought.
Nice. I think, Benjamin, I want to kick it over to you just for a brief comment. So I might imagine for someone like SheerShare, I'm just going to make this up very quickly. Like in the tweet, the old school tweet, like the 140 character, it's, if I saw this come across my desk, or email, it would be something like, we're the Airbnb for the $10 billion hair care industry, started by, two people with 40 years in the industry, something like that, right? Like that would get my attention. Like, hit all the points, very brief. It would make me sit up and then read even more. So, Benjamin, quick story on how you evaluate applications.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very rigorous process. Most of the time on our accelerator side is where we see the most, kind of narrative challenges. I think where a lot of founders, in their video interview will be much more detailed than their written. And it's like, wow, I would have skipped over that company had I not saw their video and their oral, right, setting versus like they're written down, like this is the value that we provide, et cetera. So there's something to be said about like, what are the different modalities that you are capturing information from founders, right? Like if it's just written and say that founder is not the best at, articulating on paper, their value, maybe introducing something that's more oral, like a 3-minute video or 90-minute video or something like that, where you can capture that data. You can say, okay, I get a lot more from the body language from this individual, et cetera. So, I mean, it's a challenge oftentimes, because typically founders wait like literally to the last minute to apply. And when they do that, it creates this huge bottleneck, for us as like evaluators to really effectively take the time we need, right? So a lot of time we're just looking at key metrics, like what's their current revenue, what's their current costs, what's their team look like, what's the roadmap look like ahead, what are the key challenges they might be facing, any key partnerships they have, right? So we're kind of like bullet pointing those ideas. And so even though everyone is not necessarily trained in business communication and like business writing, I recommend using like short, like bullet points, like I can read that easily, like it makes sense. What are the things that the reader of this is going to get out of it? Similar to the example you used about SheerShare, like try to create those high points, like get rid of the industry jargon, get rid of the run-on sentences and things that you're trying to really elaborate on. You're not trying to really sell me, through this. You want to make sure that you tell me the facts, right? That's what we want to get at that application. I know oftentimes, underrepresented founders aren't trained to do that. And so oftentimes when they do go through our program, the first thing we do is like, get your company statement down to one line. And you would be amazed to see how difficult that really is, even for us to help them sometimes, is to like reduce their company statement down to like a one-liner. It's tough. And so, but I think in the end, the message that we're trying to convey is that you want to put your best foot forward, whether it be writing, whether it be oral, I don't know, hieroglyphics, however you submit your application, to a program or to a fund. You want to make sure that they have the information they need to make a well-informed, credible and effective decision, right? And it's up to you as the founder to convey that. It's not up to the investor to pull that out of you. That's up for you to convey to the investor.
Right. So this has been an awesome conversation. I learned a ton about Dallas. Want to learned a ton about the next generation of founders coming up, and also how unique it is. I mean, we don't see in Atlanta. You were throwing out names of various cities. I don't, Richard, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think we don't really talk about Metro Atlanta like that. It's like just Atlanta. Right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So that was super interesting. So Ethan, I want to kick it over to you for, I mean, any final thoughts and/or, you know, how might people get in contact either with you or the company?
Yeah, final thoughts on just building on what Benjamin and Richard said. You know, for me, we're very different in how we look at things at Agave Fund. Again, my background's data, so I couldn't care less about your pitch or any of that. None of that. I'll throw that out the window. I care about data, traction. Are you growing? And I think the earlier as a founder that you obsess over data, you obsess over the metrics, you obsess over traction, having week over week progress, the sooner you're going to get to where you want to get to. And actually, that's what stood out to me more than anything with Cheershare, was at the beginning, they sent this huge deck of, it was literally a metrics deck. It wasn't a pitch deck, it was a metrics deck of all the things that they look at. The fact that they think this way, they don't need to tell me anything, I'm going to invest. And then when you meet the Caldwells, you're like, well, I sure as hell am going to invest, right? I think the more that founders have that mindset, you know, measure what matters, right? Or what matters is measured, frankly. That's really how it should be thought of, is that if you care about it, you'll measure it. You'll go far. If folks want to contact me, you know, they can always go to agave.fund. That's our website, and apply, or they can look for me on LinkedIn. My LinkedIn handle is super-Saiyan. It's not my name, actually. It's super-SAIYAN. So feel free to look me up on LinkedIn that way.
Nice. Benjamin, how can people get in contact with you or your organization?
Yeah, definitely. I'm on LinkedIn. No cool name, just my own, Benjamin J. Van. I'm most active on LinkedIn. You can find us on our organization on Instagram as well, and LinkedIn at Impact Venture Co. You can apply for our upcoming fall 2021 cohort. Applications are open. We're also accepting applications for our fund pipeline as well. So that goes for entrepreneurs that are looking for both debt and equity. So we play with a number of different tools in the financial toolkit. You know, my background is in finance, and so worked in micro financing as well as angel investing and doing some other things around philanthropy. So we take a very unique approach to investing. We try to match the capital to the entrepreneur versus the other way around. So if you're looking for more flexible capital, we can see what we can put together. So you can find us there at Impact Ventures, impact-ventures.co. That's .co, not .com, is our website, and you can find most of the information there.
Nice. And then Richard, quickly, how can people get in contact with you?
Yeah, I'm active on LinkedIn. So that's probably one of the easiest ways, but also you can find me on, or you can submit a web form on knollventures.com, just spell KNOLL ventures.com, where anybody can submit a inquiry to the firm. And then lastly, my email is richard@knollventures.com, so anybody can kind of cold email me at any time. Nice.
This has been an awesome conversation, gentlemen. Looking forward to what's next for Dallas, and looking forward to Dallas startup founders applying to Venture Atlanta. You can go to the website, ventureatlanta.org. I believe the application deadline is August 6th. So you got a few weeks. Don't like about a month. Like Benjamin said, don't wait to the very last minute. You don't want to go too early, but you're right in a sweet spot right now. So Dallas, we're looking forward to you all applying. If you want feedback on your application, send us a note. We'll follow up with messages after this, and also reach out to us on LinkedIn as well. So yeah, if you have, Benjamin, Ethan, if you know some good folks here, we're looking forward to putting those folks in the best position to get connected to Venture Atlanta and the investor community. So thank you all for being here. We're looking forward to talking with you all soon. Talk to y'all soon. Peace out, y'all.